Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA malicious compliance stories. In this video, an arrogant HOA developer built a luxury neighborhood on my private land without permission while mocking the local farmers who warned them about the dangers. However, instead of suing them, I actively encouraged them to build even more houses, which then led to their absolutely catastrophic downfall. Here is why you never mess with a farmer. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is titled r/malicious-compliance HOA built 21 houses on my land. I complied. So this happened a few years back and I'm finally ready to share this story because honestly, it still makes me grin every time I think about it. Fair warning, this is gonna be a long one, but trust me, the ending is absolutely worth it. And indeed guys, it is absolutely worth it. Also at the end, we have another malicious compliance story that you don't wanna miss, so stick until the end. Anyway, I inherited a decent sized piece of rural land from my late father when I was in my early 30s. The property was about 15 hectares of mostly flat land with some rolling hills on one side, located in what you could call the countryside, not exactly remote but definitely not one of those fancy suburban areas. My father had owned this land for decades and had always talked about maybe doing something with it eventually, but he passed before he could make any concrete plans. Now, the thing about this particular piece of land is that it sits in what locals have always called a flood-prone area. Every few years during particularly heavy rainy seasons, the whole area gets completely submerged under several feet of water. It's been happening for as long as anyone can remember. My father knew it, his father knew it, and pretty much every local in the surrounding communities knew it too. That is exactly why most of the nearby villages are built on higher ground and why my father never bothered building anything substantial on the property. The flooding is not just some minor inconvenience that comes and goes in a day or two. When it happens, we are talking about serious flooding that can last for weeks with water levels high enough to reach the second floor of a typical house. The pattern is pretty predictable too. It happens during the heaviest part of rainy season, usually when there's a major storm system that just parks itself over our region and dumps water for days on end. About 2 years after inheriting the land, I got an opportunity to work abroad for what was supposed to be a 1-year contract. The money was too good to pass up, and since I was not doing anything with the land anyway, I figured it would just sit there waiting for me like it had been doing since my father died. So off I went to work abroad, thinking I would come back to the same quiet piece of rural land I had left behind. Man, was I in for a shock. When I returned home after about 15 months abroad, the contract kept getting extended. I was absolutely stunned by what I found. Where there used to be empty land, there was now a partially developed HOA neighborhood with paved roads, streetlights, and about 8 houses already built, with construction actively ongoing on many more lots. I drove up to what used to be the entrance to my property, and there was this fancy gate with a sign reading some generic name, and a guardhouse with an actual security guard. The guard looked at me suspiciously when I tried to drive through. "Sir, this is private property. Do you have business here?" I was so stunned I could barely form any words. This is my land. I own this property. The guard looked at me like I was completely delusional. "Sir, this is a private HOA subdivision owned by the development company. You must be confused." I spent the next several hours trying to piece together what the hell had happened to my land. After making numerous phone calls and doing some digging, the picture became clear, and it was even worse than I had initially thought. So apparently, after I had left for abroad, a group of wealthy investors from the nearest major city had formed a development company with the intention of creating what they called a premium rural residential community. They had somehow managed to acquire official-looking documents claiming ownership of my land and had started development almost immediately. The really infuriating part was discovering how they had exactly pulled this off. They had worked with corrupt local government officials to essentially create fraudulent ownership documents claiming the land had been abandoned and was therefore available for development in the public interest. Since I was out of the country and not around to contest anything, they had managed to push through their bogus claim with minimal resistance. My cousin, who was supposed to be checking on the property while I was gone, had apparently either been bought off or intimidated into silence. When I finally managed to track him down, he claimed he had assumed I decided to sell the land to the developers and had been too nervous to contact me abroad to ask about it. Really helpful, right? Well, the development company also had seriously ambitious plans. According to the documents I managed to get copies of, they were planning to build at least 50 houses total, complete with a community center, swimming pool area, and recreational facilities. They were marketing the whole thing as an exclusive countryside living with modern conveniences targeted at wealthy city residents who wanted a weekend retreat away from urban pollution and traffic. Now, at this point, most people would probably immediately hire a lawyer and start fighting to get their land back through the courts. And believe me, that thought definitely crossed my mind. But here's the thing, I knew something these developers did not know, and as I observed these entitled city people strutting around my land like they owned the place, a completely different plan started forming in my mind. You see, these development company people had clearly done absolutely zero research into the actual environmental characteristics of the land they had stolen from me. They had seen a big flat piece of rural property and thought, perfect for HOA subdivision development, without bothering to ask any locals about the history of flooding in the area. I spent several days just observing the construction work and talking to some of the contractors they had hired, most of whom were local guys who actually knew me and my family, and that is when I learned just how completely clueless these developers really were about what they had gotten themselves into. The houses they were building were genuinely beautiful, I will give them that. Modern two-story structures with contemporary designs, clearly using expensive materials, obviously targeting wealthy buyers who could afford premium pricing. But they were building every single house at ground level with absolutely no consideration for drainage, flood mitigation, or any of the basic environmental realities of the location. When I casually chatted with one of the local contractors, he actually asked me, "Sir, should I mention to them about the flooding problems? They don't seem to have any idea." And that is when the malicious compliance plan really crystallized in my mind. Instead of immediately fighting them through the legal system, which would have been expensive, extremely time-consuming, and uncertain given the level of government corruption they had already demonstrated they could navigate, I decided to let them continue with their development project. And not only that, I was actively gonna encourage and help them expand it even further. I started by approaching the development company leadership, but not as the rightful owner of the land. Instead, I introduced myself as a local resident who was very interested in their impressive development project. The company's management team consisted of 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, all clearly wealthy city types who seemed to view our rural area as their personal investment playground. The company president was this particularly arrogant guy who wore expensive business clothes even when visiting the muddy construction sites, and who had developed a habit of speaking condescendingly to all the local workers and contractors. When I first approached him, he was initially quite dismissive of me, saying, "Are you interested in purchasing a lot? Because I should mention up front that our properties start at a premium price point that might be beyond your budget range." I put on my best humble local farmer performance. "Oh no sir, I definitely could not afford anything this nice. I just live in the area and I'm really impressed with the quality of what you're building here. And actually, I happen to own some land nearby that I'm not using for anything productive." His entire attitude shifted immediately when he realized I might be someone he could acquire additional land from cheaply. "Oh really? Exactly how much land are we talking about?" "About 3 hectares, directly adjacent to your current development area. I inherited it from my father, but I'm just a simple farmer type. I don't have the money or technical knowledge to develop property properly like you professionals do. I was thinking maybe your company might be interested in purchasing it or incorporating it into your project somehow." I could practically see dollar signs lighting up in his eyes. And by the way guys, just to quickly interject here, I know exactly where this is going and I really like this. And if you enjoy these farmer malicious compliance HOA stories, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel because I upload daily videos, and like the video because that would help me a lot. Thank you so much for the support. Anyway, 3 hectares directly adjacent to their premium development would be incredibly valuable for future expansion phases. Over the following weeks, I had multiple meetings with various members of the development company's management team. I played the simple rural farmer role absolutely perfectly, acting like I was somewhat intimidated by their obvious sophistication and grateful for any interest they showed in my, essentially worthless, inherited farmland. Meanwhile, I was carefully gathering as much info as possible about their detailed plans, construction timeline, and financial projections. During these conversations, I learned that they had already pre-sold approximately half of their planned 50 houses to wealthy buyers in the city, with construction scheduled to be completed within the next 18 to 20 months. The buyers were paying seriously premium prices for what was being marketed as exclusive countryside living with modern amenities and privacy. The development company eventually made an offer to purchase my 3 hectares for what they described as a generous amount, though it was obviously far below market value. They presented this as them doing me a huge favor by taking undevelopable farmland off my hands. I acted appropriately grateful for their generosity and agreed to their terms, which was obviously a completely meaningless transaction, since I was essentially selling them land that was already part of the larger property they had stolen from me, but of course they had no idea about that detail. Here is where the malicious compliance aspect really kicked into high gear though. Instead of just going through with this fake land sale, I started actively encouraging them to expand their development plans even more dramatically. You know, I mentioned to the company president during one of our meetings, there's actually quite a bit more undeveloped land in this general area that other local families might be willing to sell at reasonable prices. This whole region is basically just unused farmland. You could probably build a really massive community here if you wanted to. I could see his excitement growing visibly. Really? How much additional land might we be talking about? Oh, probably another 10 or 15 hectares at least. Most of the families around here are just poor farming families who would probably love to sell their land for development money instead of struggling with agricultural work. You could potentially create a really large-scale residential community here. I then spent the next several months essentially working as their unpaid local land acquisition consultant. I introduced them to various local landowners, most of whom were actually my relatives or close family friends, who were completely in on what I was doing. Together, we managed to convince the development company to purchase or lease several additional plots of land, all of which happened to be located in the same flood-prone basin area. The development company became so excited about their discovery of this massively undervalued rural development opportunity that they revised their construction plans upwards multiple times. What had started as a 50-house HOA subdivision became 70 houses, then 90 houses, and eventually they were making plans for well over 100 houses spread across the expanded development area. They brought in additional investors to finance the expanded scope, hired more construction crews, and really ramped up the pace of building. At the peak of construction activity, they had 4 separate crews working simultaneously, building houses as quickly as they could pour concrete foundations and frame structures. Throughout this entire process, not a single person from the development company ever asked about flooding, drainage systems, weather patterns, or any other environmental factors. They were so completely focused on their vision of creating this profitable rural residential community that they never bothered to research even the most basic environmental characteristics of the area they were developing in. The local contractors and construction workers all knew about the flooding history, of course, but the development company leadership had created such an arrogant, dismissive work environment that none of the local people felt comfortable speaking up with concerns or suggestions. Plus, the construction workers were making really good money from this building boom, so they were not particularly motivated to warn people who consistently treated them with disrespect. I observed all of this happening with a mixture of genuine amazement and growing anticipation. These people had stolen my family's land, consistently treated the entire local community with contempt and condescension, and were now actually paying me to help them build what would eventually become their own destruction. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. By the time rainy season started approaching, the development company had completed 21 houses with residents already moved in and living there part-time, plus another dozen houses in various stages of construction. The community was actually quite impressive visually: nicely paved roads, professional landscaping, modern streetlights, and even a small community center building. The new residents were exactly what you would expect based on the marketing: wealthy city people who had purchased these houses as weekend retreats or vacation properties. They drove expensive cars, employed local people as domestic help for their weekend visits, and generally conducted themselves like they were bringing modern civilization to a backwoods rural area that had been desperately waiting for their arrival. But I knew exactly what was coming their way. About 3 weeks before the heavy rains typically begin each year, I initiated the final phase of my plan. I started distributing informational flyers throughout the entire subdivision community, providing warnings about potential flooding dangers. By the way guys, I forgot to mention, my apologies once again if my voice sounds a little bit weird, but I'm still recovering from wisdom tooth extraction that was done a few days ago. Either way, the flyers were straightforward and factual. It said, "Flood warning, this area has experienced severe flooding every 2 to 3 years during heavy rainy seasons. Previous floods have reached water levels of 6 to 8 feet above ground level. Residents should consider temporary relocation during severe weather warnings." I signed the flyer simply as a concerned local resident and made sure to distribute them to every single house in the development, as well as posting copies on community bulletin boards and leaving stacks at the HOA subdivision office and community center. The reaction from the development company was exactly what I had anticipated. The company president called an emergency community meeting to address what he described as malicious fear-mongering flyers being distributed by local troublemakers. I made sure to attend this meeting, still maintaining my role as their helpful local land acquisition consultant. "This is obviously nothing more than an attempt by certain locals to frighten our residents and create problems for our community," the company president announced to the packed community center. "We have conducted thorough due diligence on this entire property development. There are absolutely no legitimate flooding concerns in this area." One of the residents raised her hand and asked whether they should perhaps check with the local government agencies about official flood zone designations and drainage infrastructure. "Completely unnecessary," another board member replied dismissively. "We have worked directly with all the relevant government authorities throughout our entire development process. If there were any genuine environmental concerns or safety issues, they would have been identified and addressed during our official permitting procedures." I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud at that statement. Of course, there had never been any legitimate permitting process, since the entire claim to ownership of the land was fraudulent from the very beginning. A few residents seemed somewhat nervous about the flood warnings, but the majority appeared to be convinced by the development company leadership's assurances that this was simply local troublemakers trying to cause problems for their successful community. One resident even suggested that we should really do something about these locals who are spreading false information designed to hurt our property values. The company president nodded in agreement. "We are definitely gonna identify whoever is responsible for distributing these false warning flyers and pursue appropriate legal action against them. We absolutely cannot allow troublemakers to undermine our community with completely baseless scare tactics." Just perfect. They were so completely committed to maintaining their narrative that they were actively discouraging their own residents from taking even the most basic safety precautions. Over the following week, I distributed even more detailed warning flyers with increasingly specific info. Severe storm system approaching. Weather forecast predicts sustained heavy rainfall for 5 to 7 consecutive days beginning this weekend. Historical flooding patterns in this area during similar weather conditions have resulted in catastrophic property damage. Residents should evacuate to higher ground immediately. The development company's response was swift and entirely predictable. They hired private security guards to try and identify and catch whoever was distributing the so-called false emergency warnings, and they sent out their own official communications to all residents, firmly dismissing the flood warnings as malicious rumors being spread by jealous local people who resent our successful community. They even organized a community-wide barbecue event for the weekend when the heavy rains were forecasted to begin, explicitly as a way of demonstrating their confidence in their community's safety and their defiance of the so-called fear-mongering tactics. Meanwhile, I was quietly moving my own personal belongings from the old caretaker's shack to higher ground and making sure all of my relatives and friends in the surrounding area were properly prepared for what was definitely coming. The weather reports were absolutely crystal clear. A major storm system was approaching that would bring the heaviest sustained rainfall our region had experienced in nearly 4 years. Local meteorologists were predicting rainfall accumulations that would definitely trigger the kind of severe flooding that I knew was inevitable. But the HOA residents were enthusiastically attending their defiant community barbecue, completely convinced that they knew better than all the simple rural people who had been trying to warn them about danger. The first day of serious rainfall started on a Saturday morning. By Saturday afternoon, water was beginning to accumulate noticeably in all the lower elevation areas of the HOA community. Several concerned residents called the company president, who confidently assured them that this was simply normal seasonal drainage issues that would resolve themselves quickly once the rain stopped. By Saturday evening, the main community access road was already completely underwater. By Sunday morning, water was reaching the front steps of the houses built at the lowest elevations. And that is when the panic finally began to set in. The company president attempted to organize some kind of emergency evacuation procedure, but by that point it was far too late for most residents to safely drive out of the area. The water level was rising rapidly, and the access road had become completely impassable for vehicles. I watched this entire disaster unfold from a hillside location about a kilometer away using a pair of binoculars. It was seriously like watching a slow-motion catastrophe movie, except instead of feeling sympathy for the victims, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction and justice being served. By Sunday afternoon, water levels had reached the second-floor windows of most houses in the subdivision. Residents were trapped on their upper floors and rooftops, desperately calling emergency services for rescue. The community center building was completely submerged too. Expensive cars were floating down what used to be paved streets like boats in a river. Emergency rescue services did their absolute best to help, but actually reaching the flooded area was extremely difficult, and they were simultaneously dealing with multiple flood emergencies across several different regions. It took nearly 3 full days to successfully evacuate all the trapped residents using a combination of boats and helicopter rescues. The flooding lasted for weeks. And well, when the water finally receded enough for people to return and assess the damage, the destruction was complete and total. Every single house in the entire subdivision had been wrecked beyond any possibility of repair. All the infrastructure, paved roads, streetlights, the community center, landscaping, was completely ruined. Most of the residents' personal belongings, including their expensive weekend vehicles, were total losses. The financial damage was absolutely massive. The 21 completed houses alone represented hundreds of millions of pesos in investment capital. In US dollar terms, for the international readers, it was easily close to or over $5 million, depending on the conversion rates at the time. The ongoing construction projects were also complete losses. Most devastating of all for the development company, they had taken out substantial loans to finance their aggressive expansion plans, and they were now facing bankruptcy with literally no surviving assets to show for the entire investment. But honestly, the best part was still yet to come. Within 6 weeks of the flood disaster, I began filing comprehensive legal documents proving my original legitimate ownership of the entire land area, supported by historical documentation that I'd been quietly collecting during the entire period of their development activities. Since their original claim to ownership of the land had been completely fraudulent from the beginning, and since they were now financially devastated with no resources available to fight legal challenges, they had essentially no viable defense against my ownership claim. The development company initially attempted to argue that they should be compensated for all the improvements they had made to my land, claiming I should pay them for the development work they had completed. But their legal position was completely hopeless. You simply cannot claim financial compensation for improvements made to land that you never actually owned legally in the first place. The corrupt local government officials who had originally helped them forge the fraudulent ownership documents suddenly became impossible to locate when it came time to defend or explain their previous actions. Funny how quickly people disappear when legal accountability becomes a real possibility. And by the way guys, I forgot to mention when I found this post, OP described in the beginning where he was from, which, just to make things clear, is not the USA. However, I censored that in order to not dox OP because I think the story should stay a little bit anonymous just to protect OP. Anyway, after many months of legal proceedings, the courts officially restored complete legal ownership of all the land to me, and the development company formally dissolved and abandoned any remaining claims to the property. I waited another full year for everything to completely dry out, settle, and stabilize, and then hired a cleanup crew to remove all the debris from the destroyed houses and infrastructure. The cleanup work actually did not cost me very much out of pocket because a significant amount of the building materials were still valuable as scrap metal and salvaged construction materials, so I was able to sell enough of the salvaged materials to cover most of my cleanup expenses. So now I am back to owning exactly the same piece of rural land that I started with, except now it's been nicely cleared and leveled thanks to all the construction and site preparation work that the development company completed before the flood destroyed everything they built. In a few more years, once I'm confident the local government corruption issues have been properly addressed, I might actually consider developing some of the higher elevation portions of the property myself, but you can be absolutely certain that I will build everything well above the flood line. They destroyed themselves entirely through their own arrogance, greed, and willful refusal to listen to local knowledge. I just did not interfere with their self-destructive process. The former company president actually tried to contact me once after all the legal proceedings were completely finalized, claiming I had somehow deceived and manipulated them, demanding that I compensate them for their financial losses. I politely explained to him that I had never misrepresented myself in any way. I had always been exactly what I claimed to be, which was a local resident who owned land in the area. If they had bothered to conduct even basic research into the environmental history of the area they were developing, or if they had simply listened to the repeated flood warnings that I had tried to provide to their community, none of this disaster would have happened. He didn't really have much of a response to that logic. These days my land is peaceful and quiet again. The natural flood cycle continues exactly as it always has. We actually had another significant flood about 2 years after the development company disaster, but of course there were no houses there to be destroyed that time. Sometimes I drive out to the property and walk around the cleared areas where those 21 houses used to stand before they were swept away. They thought they could steal land from a simple rural farmer who wouldn't have the resources or knowledge to stop them, but instead they ended up paying me to help them construct their own destruction on land that was never legally theirs to begin with. And yeah guys, we all know you never mess with a farmer. I hope that Entitled HOA learned their lesson. And if you enjoy the malicious compliance stories, which we will continue now, please post some star emojis in the comments to encourage me to read more of them. The next one is a brand new MC story that is titled 6 minutes? Really? And it starts like this. I drive a semi for a living at the moment. I'm in the first 1 to 2 years of BS stage before switch to towing these monsters. I work for a company that we will call Welfare Expedited. They suck, but I have to take some crap until other companies will take me. So basically, I get a load of drywall in New Hampshire and shoot it down to New Jersey to a building supply store. I did everything legally possible to get it there in their timed window, including cooking my books a little bit. As soon as my legally required split sleeper berth break was done, I drove straight there without stopping. I got to said sleep spot with 20 minutes to spare the night prior. GPS said I would be there at like 12:30, but the truck GPS does not have traffic, and I'm heading through the Bronx and over the GW. All said and done, I arrived at the drywall spot at 2:06. Their delivery window is 7 AM to 2 PM. So far no one has even sweat 30 minutes at these places. I generally call if it's gonna be more than 15 minutes. I just assume no one's gonna be an idiot about 6 minutes. Well, let me tell you, I was wrong. I walk in and give the usual, "Hey, I'm the Welfare Expedited guy. Where do you all want me to park up?" The guy behind the counter, guy number 1, looks to another guy, says, "What do you think?" I don't hear/see what guy number 2 says back, but guy number 1 says, "Sorry, the cutoff is 2 PM. Me, "It is 2:06. Guy, yeah, the cutoff is 2 PM. Me, "Are you serious? I have to come back tomorrow over 6 minutes? Guy, "Yeah, sorry." He kinda seemed like he thought it was absurd too, but didn't speak up. Me, Wow. Now, it's not like that they cannot unload me. The forklift drivers are right there, nothing is going on, and they end their work day at 4 p.m, so they've got 2 hours left. The actual unloading with their forklifts will take them around 10 minutes, and me getting the heavy tarps and securement off and out of their way, alone? If they asked me to rush it, I could have that crap out of the way in 20 minutes. I could have been out of the way by 2:45 easily. It's not ideal for me to do the things that way, but I can. They know that this is their business. They have 5 flatbed delivery trucks themselves. When a Karen wants to buy a product after closing and the underpaid retail workers want to go home, I am with that. Go home, Karen. I would never show up to a restaurant within even 30 minutes of their closing time. I don't order pizza within 30 minutes of closing time. This is worker to worker though, and I'm the one being made to go home late. These dudes were gonna be here for 2 more hours anyway. This was just one guy's way of feeling powerful. The power of feeling like a theoretical 6 minutes of their time is worth more than a minimum of 16 hours of mine where I'm not paid, and they know that. They know I am paid by the mile, they know they are costing me a day of pay, and they still say no. I literally thought they were joking, so I miss out on hundreds of dollars over just 6 minutes. Well, my company takes my next run off me because of this, and now what would have been drop Thursday, pick up Thursday night, drop Friday morning, pick up Friday whenever, go home, deliver Monday, has become drop on Friday, pick up on Friday, go home, drop Monday. So I headed to a rest stop 10 minutes away and hung out. Until 1:40 p.m. Friday, I pulled in at 1:56 p.m. Just to really show how crappy these people were being, they just hung out and told me where to park at 2:20. So that is way after 2:06. It truly was not about their time, they just screwed me over to feel powerful. So the cutoff for deliveries is 2 p.m. and they close at 4, so I took my sweetest time taking the tarps and securement off. The guy who made the call to tell me no, he twice came out and asked me to hurry up. Can you take the tarps off now and roll those straps later? Nah. Well, just warning you, we leave at 4. Okay. So there these guys are in the hot sun. Thursday had been nice and cool because of rain. We could have done this comfortably, sitting on forklifts waiting for me. Who takes a 20-minute crap in their bathroom, takes multiple water breaks in my truck? Eventually, the guy who I had noticed in the back office this day but didn't see the day before comes out and gets all the plastic wrap off for me and seems real frustrated. But I just roll up and my straps all nice and neat, and I admit I screwed up here. They start unloading me at like 3:30 and I was shooting for 3:50. I noticed the back office guy talking to the guy who made the call that 2:06 was too late the day before, and he seems animated. Then I take my sweet time doing the paperwork in my truck that they brought back to me all crumbled up for some reason. I wonder if there was like some behind the scenes crash out where one guy was like, "F this dude," crumples paper and throws it out, and it has to be fished out of the trash or something. And I hang out waiting for a safe way to pull out of their lot so they can close their fences and leave, etc. until 4:06. I will never get the hundreds of dollars I lost or that day back, but on day 2 I noticed a hot parking lot smelled like pee for some reason. Edit, some of you all seem to not get it, they still had a 2-hour window to get 1 hour of work done, their cutoff is 2 p.m. to be done by 4 p.m, and there weren't other trucks, there wasn't other crap going on, this was a small dirt lot. And before we end the video, let's read one last funny Malicious Compliance brand new story that is titled "Boss Demanded Detailed Daily Reports? Sure, enjoy your 87-page novel." So I work in IT at a mid-sized company. My job involves a lot of small but critical tasks, most of which are invisible when everything is running smoothly. Our new manager came in and decided that we were not doing enough. His brilliant idea: "From now on, I want a detailed daily report from everyone. Every single task you did, no matter how small." Okay, boss, sure, you want detailed? You got it. I spent the next week tracking everything. 8:02 a.m. logged into the system. 8:04 a.m. responded to ticket number XYZ, password reset. 8:07 a.m. adjusted printer queue on floor 3. 8:09 a.m. took a big dump. Okay, I made that up. All the way through every mouse click, every reboot, every quick fix nobody usually writes down. By Friday, my daily report was 87 pages long, Times New Roman, size 11, single-spaced. I attached it as a PDF and CC'd everyone he had put on the distribution list. Monday morning, he storms into my office. Him, "What the hell is this?" Me, "My detailed daily report per your request. Did you want more screenshots?" Funny thing, later that day, a new policy email went out. "Starting immediately, weekly summaries are sufficient. Bullet points encouraged." Guess we are not doing enough anymore. And yeah guys, thank you so much for watching. Please check out my endless playlist on the left if you cannot get enough of my content, and I will see you again tomorrow.